breakers and thy waves have rolled over me. The Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and his song will be with me in the night, a prayer to the God of my life. I will say to God my rock, why hast thou forgotten me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? As a shattering of my bones, my adversaries revile me, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? Why are you in despair, O my soul? And why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, the help of my countenance and my God. So I think the theme that we see running, as we said, between Psalm and Revelation is that there's always going to be enemies of God and of God's people. Like back when this was written, you see a lot of requests for help against enemies. And of course, we know the Revelation, they're dealing with a severe persecution from an enemy. And then we still continue to do that today. We still have to deal with the enemies of God. So, but I think that's a pretty familiar psalm to most of us. All right, so back to Revelation. Last week we got to start in on Revelation 17, and if you guys want to go ahead and put up we got the PDF up there. We're on the third section here in 17, which John is taken into the wilderness and given a vision. Now then, what's interesting here is as you read through that, the vision isn't necessarily in the wilderness, but he's in the wilderness when the vision is being given to him. And it's dealing with the victory of Christ over the enemies that are being depicted here in these visions, and basically Babylon. And that's what we're talking about in chapter 17. Last week, we got into discussing who is the harlot and what does she represent. I wanted to read that since we're going to be talking about that some more this week. I want to go ahead and have one of you guys read Romans 17, and we'll kind of just recap briefly what we talked about last week, and then get into the rest of 17 here. So.
Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. Then he carried me away with the spirit unto the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of adulterations and unclean things of her immorality. And her forehead, the name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And I saw a woman drunk with blood of the saints and the blood of the witness of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the 7 heads and... Hang on. Where am I at here? Then the beast was saw, and it is not, and about to come up in the abyss and go to the destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, and the name has not been written on the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast, that he is not and not will come. Here is the mind which is wisdom, the 7 heads and 7 mountains of which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is on the other, has not yet come, and when the other comes, he will remain for a little while. The beast which is not himself, and also the 8th kingdom, and they will receive authority as kings of the beast for 1 hour. And these have purpose, and will give their power and authority to the beast. And these will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him, called and the chosen and faithful. And he said to me, The waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, the people and multitudes of nations and tongues, and the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and eat her, and will eat her flesh, and will burn up with fire. For the God has put in their hearts to execute a purpose, having common purpose, and by giving the kingdom to the beast, and to the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman who you saw is in the great city, which reigns with the King of kings, the kings of the earth.
All right, thanks, DP. Okay, so last week we talked about how, what does this harlot on the beast represent? And kind of gave a few ideas that people have. As you know, I think that it is Rome, and we'll get into more of that as we look at this vision. We've been talking about it a lot. But there are some other things that people think it might represent. And so that has a pretty large impact into how you look at all these visions, depending on what you think this harlot represents. So what we talked about was what some people think. Some would say it's the apostate church. Some go even further and say it's the Roman Catholic Church. There are those who believe it's just a symbol. Futurists believe it to be an enormous false religious system. I assume, like I said, I don't really go into detail to look at what all the different theories are under that line of thinking, but I would assume that some would think that it might be Islam as a worldwide religion with, you know, the Antichrist and all that sort of stuff. There might be some that think it's another religion yet to come that we haven't seen, but I would assume that that's what they're saying. And then some, we said, even go back to say it's Jerusalem, which would mean then that you're talking like the Jews, and that it would be, most of this would be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem then. What I said is there's a lot of reasons why I don't think that could be the case. I think that, if you look at these visions, and over again, we're talking about the complete defeat of an enemy. So it's an enemy that no longer is going to exist after these things occur. Well, certainly false religion still exists. All of those things are still are here. And certainly Christians are still being persecuted by people of different religions, by governments and those kind of things. So all that's still there. I don't think that the book is purely meant to be symbolic. It certainly seems to be discussing some events that are going to occur. And also, I don't think that it was written at a point in time where and I don't think God would call his people, the former people, the Israelites, the beast and that kind of thing. So, although sometimes he did refer to them as a harlot, I don't think that that's what we're talking about here in the book. So, I don't think that those things apply. I think we're talking about Rome and the fall of Rome. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that here as we just talk about this vision, because the angel actually explains some of what this vision means. The angel tells John that the beast was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss. And he also says that the 7 hills are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now then, granted, the 7 hills, then he gets into 7 kings, so maybe you say, well, it's sitting on the kings, or you could go about this in different ways, but normally that would refer to Rome when you say it sits on 7 hills. And if you want to put that map up there, Dave, this is about, we talked about this, that Rome sat on 7 hills, and that was how it was referred to. So it seems like the angel's pretty clearly saying that we're dealing with Rome here. And of course, the description fits with the on-again, off-again relationship that we talked about, where some emperors are good and some are bad. So the description that's being given here fits with that as well. The angel tells John that the heads represent 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is yet to come. And the beast is also a king that is yet to come. So this is where it kind of gets interesting when people start trying to apply this. And as I told you, I'm not going to get into too much of like what exactly is this. We're going to talk about it a little bit just so that we have a grasp on what people are thinking. But I don't want to I don't know. Like I can't tell you with any certainty as to exactly who or what these are referring to, but there are some ideas here. So we won't get into too much specifics, but we'll give a little bit here. So McGuigan, in his commentary, he links the divisions of Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 and 17 together, and he identifies the 8 Roman emperors that he believes are being referred to in Revelation 17 here, and he says that he thinks they're Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. And then Vespasian would be the one that is, Titus the other to come, and then Domitian would be the 8th. I think, Charles, based on our conversations, you would say that that's a little early as far as in this process of what you would place these emperors and where they would go. So I would say that if you place the writing during Domitian's time, that would actually make him or one after him, the one that is, and then the seventh could be Trajan, and the eighth Hadrian. You can get into that whole line of which ones are you dealing with here. But the only thing that I had to say about this is I would lean more towards a later time frame than what McGuigan's given it. Like, I agree with Charles that it's probably more later. But whatever the case, we're dealing with probably Roman emperors and dealing with how they're treating the church. Now, Hines goes with a different route, as you know. We talked a little bit about the differences that he has. He says that maybe they're representative of nations. So you would have Assyria, Babylonia, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, etc. And he also says that, and this is where he qualifies it, even if there's uncertainty as exactly what they represent, one can be certain that the seven heads represent something that persecuted God's people at the instigation of the devil. I think that seems pretty straight. We can pretty much all agree on that, I think. I think my opinion would be, yeah, we're talking about Roman emperors. I'm not exactly sure which ones. I would lean more towards the later dating on it. What about the 10 kings? What do you think those represent? Or who are they? Tells us a little bit, right? They're allies of Rome, right? They're allied to it. Eventually, some of those kingdoms will rise up and conquer it, right? That's what he's saying. Does anybody in here want to give, like, I'm not a historian, so I'll give you a real brief one, but does anybody that's real familiar with it want to give a brief summary of how Rome fell? The external forces? We talked a little bit about the internal forces, right? I mean, you had politician, corruption, false religion, immorality, all these things from the inside, right? But then what about the outside? Anybody want to do that, or you want me just to give my real quick synopsis?
The devaluation of the money had a lot to do with it, because the military didn't want to get paid with their coins anymore because they were worthless.
Right, so yeah, that goes back to talking about like some of those things that we saw in the when the trumpets were sounded and the bowls, like what happened? Well, commerce was hit, right? Like you go back to some of those things, and that's what we're talking about. This all, to point to exactly what does this symbol represent, a lot of times I can't tell you, but as an overall, yeah, was commerce hit? Yeah, commerce was hit, devalued. All of these things started causing problems internally, and then what happened from the external? Well, we talked about that when the Euphrates dried up, right? What did that represent? Well, it represented people coming in to conquer, right? So what was that conquering? Well, I'll just give you my brief, and then if anybody wants to add anything to this, feel free. But I know that the Gothic, and this is also assuming that the internet's correct, which it's not always, so anybody correct me if this is wrong. But the Gothic War was from 376 to 382 and included a Roman defeat at the Battle of Adrianople. Then you have Rome is sacked by the Visigoths, which were a wandering nation of Germanic people from the northeast that were led by Alaric. That was in 410. Then you have Rome was sacked again in 455 by Vandals under Genesaric, I don't know exactly how you pronounce that. And then again in 472 by another Germanic group under Ricimer. And then in 476, the German chieftain Odoacer, a barbarian king of the Scuri tribe, deposes the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus. Okay, so that eventually leads to the creation of Italy. And Rome is gone at that point. Not completely gone. Rome's still there. We know Rome exists, but it's no longer an empire, right? At least Western Rome. They split it between Western and Eastern, but Western Rome was the Roman Empire. All right, so all of these scenarios here seem to fit with what we're dealing with as we talk through some of those things that were to come and were to happen with the sounding of the trumpet, the breaking the seals, the sounding of the trumpets, and the pouring out of the bowls, and then what's being described here. All right, anybody want to go any further or deeper on the history?
Actually, those invasions, you hit some of the bigger tribes, but the invasions actually begin prior to 300.
Okay, so yeah, incursions started prior to 300.
The Germanic tribes, like the Vandals, by the way, the Vandals eventually settled in what's modern day Libya.
Okay.
So, if, like you say, Germanic tribes, Libyans are actually Germanic.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of that, right? You wouldn't think that Libyans as being of German descent, yeah, but
Most Germans are actually from Asiatic lineage. The Huns, we often derogatorily refer to the Germans as the Huns. Well, that's because the Huns were a tribe moving out of the steppes of Mongolia, which is what forced all the German tribes to move. And so you have the Germanic tribes. I want to start an international war now. The Franks are Germans, not French. The modern day French were actually Germans. They got moved out of Germany along with the Lombards and the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, all because the Mongolian Empire is beginning to spread and push all these people, and that's why you have, it's called the migration period of the Roman Empire. The Romans kind of messed up with the Cunabari, who came into their land and then ended up lying to them and attacking them, which caused all the other tribes to not trust them, as they were actually trying to pass through the Roman territory. So it started the whole big immigration war.
All right, so what you have is you have just many groups of people coming in, and at first they ally themselves with Rome, but then, like you were saying, the circumstances change, and then they turn on Rome, and then you start getting all these attacks. And eventually, the ones that I mentioned there are the big ones where you see Rome really starting to falter and starting to fall. And then, like I said, this eventually leads to Italy, modern day Italy, and that's where we're at with this. So at that point, Rome, as a function of the devil, is defeated. It's no longer put together in such a way that it can persecute the church. Okay, so the other thing that we see here is that the angel tells John that the waters the harlot sits on represent people and nations. Like it said, if you just read what it says, it tells you some of these things. And so the beast and the 10 kings will rise up against the woman and destroy her. He emphasizes that God is behind what happens. And finally, he tells John that the woman represents the great city that reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, what great city reigned over the kings of the earth at the time this vision was given? Rome, right? Pretty clear there. So I think if you read through and see what the vision itself tells you, what God tells us, we can see that it's dealing with Rome. All right, any other questions or comments or disagreements that anybody wants to discuss before we move on to 18? All right, then, if one of you guys wants to read 18, 1 through 8.
After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried out a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back even as she is paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much as for her. To the degree that she has glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. for the Lord God who judges her is strong.
All right, so we continue here to have Babylon represented as a harlot. You get more of that language dealing with some of the characteristics associated with what she was. And then you also get kind of a summary of everything that's happened, I think, here real quick. You know, the plagues are going to come on her quickly. But anyway, starting off the chapter, we get another angel with great authority coming down from heaven. So like I said, where's John? He's in the wilderness, and what does he see? He sees an angel coming down from heaven. Why do you think that John keeps on seeing or hearing something coming from heaven? Why is that being emphasized?
That's where the judgment is coming from.
That's where it's originating from, right? It's emphasizing that God is the one in control of this. It's meant to give peace and confidence to his people, that he's in control. The angel cries out with a loud voice that Babylon is fallen. And the fall of Babylon in Revelation is really drawn out here. We get it over and over and see it from different aspects. The descriptions of this fall are done in different ways. And since the fall of Babylon is being used to represent the fall of the enemy in Revelation, I wanted to kind of go back to see how the fall of Babylon is described in the Old Testament. So if we go to Isaiah 13, verses 17 through 22, if one of you guys wants to read that.
Behold, I am going to stir up the Medes against them, who will not have value of silver or take pleasure in gold, and the boughs will mow them down the young men. They will not have compassion on the fruit of the womb, nor will they pity children. In Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms and the glory of challenges, pride, and when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, it will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. Nor the Arab pitch his tent there, nor the shepherds make their flocks lie down there. But desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls, ostriches, and also will live there. And shaggy goats will frolic there. Hyenas will howl in their forward towers, and the jackals in their luxurious palaces. Her fatal time will also come soon, and her day will not be prolonged.
All right, so this is Isaiah, God revealing to Isaiah a prophecy about the fall of Babylon to the Medes. And look at the way it's described there. Was the land of Babylon actually described, or did it actually get destroyed the way that it's described here? Were animals living in the cities and nobody there? No. It wasn't even harmed all that much. In fact, Alexander the Great makes this his home, away from home, 200 years later, right? So 200 years later, it's obviously fine, the land. So we need to ask ourselves something, I think. What is God actually telling us when using this as this type of language related to the fall of this enemy? What's he actually saying? He's using the fall of Babylon that's described in this manner to represent the fall of this enemy, right? The destruction of it. So as we read through here and we get into things, people have a tendency to want to try to attach certain events and things like that to these things. But we have to remember that what is actually being done here is to emphasize that something is being changed. Something is being done away with, and there is a world-changing event that is happening here. And that's why this kind of language is being used. And then in verses 4 through 8, a voice from heaven calls for his people to come out of Babylon because God is about to give her what she deserves. The language is similar to what is given to Israel regarding literal Babylon. So let's go look at Isaiah. We were just in Isaiah. Let's go back to Isaiah 48:20 and then Jeremiah 50 and 8 and 9, if you guys could read those.
Go forth from Babylon, flee from the Chaldeans. Declare with the sound of joyful shouting, proclaim this, send it out to the end of the earth. Say, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. And Jeremiah 50, he said,
Yeah, 50 verses 8 and 9.
Yeah. Wander away from the midst of Babylon and go forth from the land of the Chaldeans. Be also like male goats at the head of the flock. For behold, I am going to arouse and bring up against Babylon a horde of great nations from the land of the north. And they will draw up their battle lines against her. From there she will be taken captive. Their arrows will be like an expert warrior who does not return empty-handed.
Okay, so do you think, what does it mean whenever God is telling them to come out of that land or come out of Babylon? Is he actually saying move physically, geographically? Sometimes he does. What do you think he's actually telling, but in this case, what is he telling them and what is he telling the Christians here about coming out of Babylon? What do you think that represents?
Not to be partaking in the deeds that they do.
Right, not to become part of that land in its practices. That's, I don't want to go political here, so we're not going to go down this road, but that's part of the thing with immigration, right? You want to assimilate people into your society so that they become part of your society. Here he's saying, don't become part of that society. So we as Christians, not in that we're not part of the United States society, but we're not to become part of the worldly society, right? We're not to participate in the acts of immorality and those kind of things. We're to come out of them. So I think that this is a call for Christians to stay righteous and pure, to stay faithful to God and not be persuaded or tricked into participating in the worldliness around us. I guess I already answered my question. I have a question here. Do you think that that's a call for us today? Has this changed at all?
It's never changed.
Yeah, it's never changed, right? It's a call for all time. God's people are to not be a part of the world. We're to come out. We're to be holy. We're to be separate. That's a part of the emphasis here. All right, anybody have any other comments on this first part of chapter 18 before we read the last part? All right, when you guys want to read 9 through 24 then?
And the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality and lived sensually with her, and they will weep and lament over her as they see the smoke of her burning, standing in the distance between the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city. For 1 hour the judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver, and precious stones and pearls and fine linen, and purple and silk and scarlet, of every kind of citron wood, and every kind of article of ivory, and the article made from a very costly wood, and bronze and iron and marble. And the cinnamon, spice, and incense, and perfume, and frankincense, and wine, and olive oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and the cattle and sheep, the cargoes of horses and chariots, and slaves and human lives. The fruit you long for is gone from you, and these things were luxurious and splendid have passed away. From you and men will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who become rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in all fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls.
for burning, saying, "What city is like the great city?" And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, "Woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her." And a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will not be found any longer. And the sound of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer, and no craftsman of any craft will be found in you any longer. And the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer, and the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride will not be heard in you any longer. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on the earth." Okay, so here we get what's labeled as a lament for Babylon, or a lament for the fall of Babylon. And I don't think that those lamenting are sad because they loved Babylon. It's not their love for Babylon that they're lamenting the loss of here. I think they're lamenting the loss of the things that came from the partnership with her. And that's what's being emphasized here. Just like what Dave and Charles indicated, what happens to Rome? Well, the money becomes worthless. And you see that being described here, right? And then her partners turn on her because they're not getting anything out of it anymore. So I believe the discussion are things here being lamented that makes it difficult to see Babylon being anything other than Rome. I mean, I don't know how anything else fits. Rome was the nation that ruled over the other nations during this time. Rome was the center of commerce, commercial center, and it made its allies wealthy. And Rome was the one persecuting Christians. So the description seems to fit all of that as we go through the overthrow here. I think it's also interesting, like some of the terminology here, it talks about like it was overthrown in 1 hour. Well, what does that indicate? Quickly, right? I think is what I get out of that. When you see 1 hour, that's when it's going to come, it's going to come quickly. Now, what's quickly? We talked about that. Of course, from a worldwide change event, a couple hundred years is a pretty quick change for things. How long has the United States been here? Not long from a historical perspective, right? To us, it's been here forever, right? Right? We don't know anything else, but it's not very long from a historical perspective. But anyway, the point I'm making is we talked about quickly. Some people will say, well, it's like thousands of years is quickly. And I don't subscribe to that. I think if we go back to the Bible, the examples we gave show that that's not quickly. But 100 years, I would say, for a world-changing event, that's pretty quick. So anyway, you kind of have to just think about that. But 1 hour indicates not a long period of time. So anyway, those who believe the visions of Revelation do cover a longer period, like Hines, think that Babylon would represent false religion as opposed to Rome specifically. I've told you why I don't think that fits. It could make sense as far as Babylon being described as deceiving people, the calls for God's people to come out of it, but there's other descriptions here that don't seem to fit. In many different ways. I don't think, for one thing, like I said, I don't think false religion is ever going to be conquered completely. That's not going to happen. So it's always going to be an enemy that the devil's going to use. So I don't think that that's something that would be being described as being completely done away with. Also, I think the appearance of being right with God is always going to be a major weapon of the devil. And what do I mean when I say that? Well, what does false religion do? It gives people a sense of security, that they think they're in the right, and it makes, so what it deceives people is what it does. What do we hear so much today about God and what he thinks about people? Just from the world in general, from the religious world in general. I always hear, God accepts you the way you are, right? You guys hear that anywhere?
A little bit.
Just a little bit? Does God accept you just the way you are?
Nope.
I'm going to answer that with a caveat. No is the correct answer, but there's a caveat. He will accept anyone. God will accept anyone. God will save anyone. Doesn't matter what you've done. But does he ask for us to do something in order to be accepted?
Well, see, that's not really a caveat. God accept anyone. No.
Only those who do what he wants. Yeah.
God will accept anyone who repents.
Repents and obeys him.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the key. That what's being left out of many people's religion today is the whole, what's our responsibility? What do we have to do to gain that salvation, to gain forgiveness, to be accepted by him? What they want to say is, as long as you just believe in him and come and sit in a pew or whatever, you're good. They don't want you to look at what he actually says or what he wants you to do. So I think that to ever say that false religion is being done away with or defeated, I don't think that that's something that fits. So that's why I throw out that argument, or that, not argument, but that way of thinking as far as what we're talking about in Revelation. Anyway, God will accept anyone, no matter what they've done, if they will repent and obey him. So when people are told that God accepts them just the way they are, and are not told what God expects for them to be right with him, that's a pretty big lie. And I don't think that that's ever going to go away. So, this lament that indicates finality, that this is being done away with, this whole thing is finished, doesn't seem to work if Babylon were representative of false religion. So, and that goes for any of the ones that we talked about, whether you're talking Catholicism, Islam, or Mormonism, or any of those things that are teaching a different doctrine from what the Bible teaches. I don't think I brought in some of the ones that nobody seems to ever point to this as being Hinduism or anything like that. And I guess that's because Hinduism and Buddhism is usually thought of as more peaceful. I don't know. But anyway, any false religion, I don't think that this could apply to that because of those things. All right, so then the descriptions in 19 through 24 speak to the finality of the destruction of Babylon, or what Babylon represents here. The stone is thrown into the sea, and then there will not be any sounds of music or play or any work or anything coming from, praise or anything coming from there. Activity in Babylon will be ended. Once again, does this mean that that land isn't going to have anything going on in it? The geographical place? No, it's not talking about that, right? It's talking about what was being carried on, what work was being done there. So once again here, I think we're talking about the fall of Rome. And I think, just how, as you go through here, if you think about how these different visions and the different applications of what is being, the different descriptions, visualize what it's representing. That's why we have to keep on asking ourselves, what does this represent? What does this represent? What does it mean as we go through it? All right, we're almost out of time. Does anybody have any comments on 18 or on the fall of Babylon or anything that big that I missed, or any big disagreements before we close out this week?
Just one final thing while we're talking about the final judgment and the destruction of us. It's real important that we realize there aren't any Babylonians today. There aren't any Romans today. There are people who live in a city called Rome, but
Right.
they're Italians. They're not.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's still people there. That's the point. The description sounds like there's not going to be anybody there anymore, but that's not what's being stated. It's that these governments, these powers are gone. They're done. They're done away with. And yeah, like you said, there's no more Babylonians. There's no more Romans. That's been totally, they're wiped off the map. There may be somebody who calls themselves a Roman because they live in Rome, but that's not the same as what we're talking about here. It's different.
Isn't Babylon Baghdad now?
No.
I'm not sure where Babylon.
Babylon's actually outside of Baghdad by about 40 miles.
Okay, so close, but not exactly there. Then yeah.
Actually, Babylon is actually a swamp area they've been draining. Saddam Hussein wanted to actually drain it and then build it back up as a new capital.
Okay. Yeah, they have money to do that. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your comments, and we'll be back in 15 minutes or give or take a little for worship.